By this point, you should have LinMot Talk installed on your computer, and you should have firmware downloaded into the drive. You should be connected up to your drive and ready to go. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start LinMot Talk by clicking on the icon, and we'll log into the drive. Click on Login, Open Offline, pick our COM port. Again, no need for a password, and we'll log in. We're now at the control panel, and you'll notice that we have an error because there's no motor configured. How are we going to fix that? We're going to use the motor wizard, and we're going to tell the drive what kind of motor is connected up to it. To do that, we're going to click on Drive and Motor Wizard, and that starts the motor wizard. The first thing we have to specify is what do we want to connect up to our LinMot drive. Well, we're going to pick LinMot Linear Motors. I'm going to click on that, click on Open, and then pick the family of motor. It's a PSO1-37. And that I know because I know what motor I have. You have to know what motor you have to connect at this point. So we're going to click on that and click Open. The motor that I have is a PSO1-37 by 120. So we'll select that and click Open. I have a 37 by 120. Click on that, click Open. And now we start our motor wizard. So step one, we have the actuator file. We'll actually pick our stator from here, and I have a PSO1 37 by 120-C. Now how do I know that? Because I have the motor in front of me, and I read that off of the nameplate. Alright, then the slider. We have to know what slider we have, and I have a PLO1 395/320, so I'll pick that. Next I'll pick the slider mounting direction, and the normal way is the regular slider mounting direction. Now you'll see from this picture that the regular slider mounting direction means that the notch for the C-clip, or the C-clip on the slider, is sticking out of the end opposite of the connector. If I had the C-clip, or the notch for the C-clip on the connector end, then I would pick reverse. And you can see that from our picture, it shows us that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick regular, and pick next. Okay. Here it wants to know what mounting flange and cooling method we have. We can either have the standard mounting flange with no fan, or we can have a flange with fan cooling. I don't have a fan, so I'll pick standard flange. Go down and click on Next. And now we pick the extension cable that we have. We have to know this from our quote or our order or our bill of materials. So I'll drop this down. I have a K15 with style cable or type of cable, which indicates the size. Here I put in the length, and I'm going to specify 4 meters because I have a 4-meter cable. The second extension cable segment is used if you have 2 cables plugged into each other in series between the drive and the motor. I only have 1 cable, so I'm not going to put that in there. I'll click Next. And the next thing we can choose is whether or not we have an external position sensor. We do not. External position sensors are used when you need accuracy or repeatability that's better than the standard LinMot linear motor. Typical repeatability for a LinMot linear motor is plus or minus 50 microns, or plus or minus about 2 thousandths. So we have no sensor, so we'll click on Next. Next, this sheet shows us or allows us to put in the mechanical layout. What is the moving part of the motor? Right now it says slider, and that means the slider is moving and the stator is stationary. We could pick moving stator if that's what we had. But and this shows, picture changes, this shows that the stator is moving and the slider is stationary. So I'm going to pick moving slider. The orientation angle is if you have it horizontal or vertical. It's horizontal now, obviously, but these buttons down here allow me to pick minus 90 degrees, which is vertical with the connector up, or plus 90 degrees, which is vertical with the connector down and the slider up. So I'm going to pick horizontal. Now we go on, the moving mass. If you know what mass is connected to the LinMot, what mass you're moving, you would put that here. If you know what your friction is, you would put that in this box. If you had a mag spring and you had an external force, you would use this box. But we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to leave these all at default 0. So I'm going to pick next. This page allows us to pick the PID settings, the servo control loop settings for the drive. We default to soft, so the drive won't be quite as responsive, but it'll be quieter. We can set it to default stiff if we want very crisp and fast performance. Generally, I start with default soft and see how that goes. Next, we can enable or disable the noise filter. When the LinMot motor is running, typically they make a kind of a somewhat quiet grinding noise that you might hear if you had it in your office, but you would never hear if it was on a production floor. So that's typical for the LinMot motors. So I'm done with this. I'll pick next. Now we are starting to get into the area of homing, and we default to mechanical stop negative search. This means that the slider will move in to the end opposite of the connector to find the hard stop. And that's typically used when we're using the C-clip on the end of the slider hitting up against the stator to act as our hard stop. Otherwise, you can have the hard stop on your machine. We'll default to mechanical stop negative search. Click next. Now, in this section, it wants to know something about what the motor looks like when the motor is hitting the hard stop. So basically, we want you to enter this A dimension from the end of the stator to the end of the slider when the LinMot motor is up against the hard stop. And if we had, say, about an inch in there, we would put in a distance of 25 millimeters. And remember, this is from the end of the stator to the end of the slider, not to the C-clip. So that's how we set up this section. So that'll finish up this page. We'll go on to the next page. Now here is where you get to set up what your 0 is. So basically what this is saying is, hey, when the LinMot motor is up against the hard stop, what dimension am I at, or where am I in my coordinate system? This is set up now for minus 10 millimeters, which means that when the LinMot slider hits the hard stop, the LinMot drive will configure itself so that that position is minus 10 millimeters in your coordinate system. That means that to go to 0 position, the slider will have to go 10 millimeters out in order to get to 0. And this is the way that we typically configure it. Next is the initial position. Typically you'll leave that at 0. That means once I am done homing, what position do you want me to stop at before I declare that the homing procedure is done? And most times that would be 0, but if you wanted it to go to some other position before the homing position is done, then you could put some non-zero number in here. So that's pretty much it for the Motor Wizard. To finish, we'll click on Finish. Now, in order to make these changes, we have to stop the firmware in the drive, and it's asking us, the firmware on the drive is running, it must be stopped. Do you want to stop it now? And I'll say yes. And now it will configure the drive. You'll notice here that it's telling us that the firmware is stopped because it needed to in order to make those configuration changes. To start the firmware again, we go up to the green arrow, we click on that. It asks us to confirm, do we really want to reboot the drive? Yes, we do. And now you'll see that the firmware in the drive will start, and we will start getting live data from the motor. So we are getting data here. We're getting power supply voltages, so this is actually live. Now if we want to actually confirm our home, what we can do is we can force the bits in the LinMot drive. We can click on this checkbox to enable manual override or forcing. In order to get the drive to enable, we have to make the override value false by clicking, and then true again by clicking again. Now we can confirm over here that the operation is enabled, and once I enable manual override on the home bit, once I click that, you'll see over here that the motor will start to move and it will home itself. So now the motor is homing, it's hitting the hard stop, it's coming out to 0, and now you'll see that the actual position is very close to 0, the demand position is 0. We can remove our home bit, and now we are ready to run. So really that's about it for the Motor Wizard. I'm Jeff Burt. Thanks for watching the video. I hope it was helpful, and please give us a call or visit us on the web at www.linmot.com. Thanks again for watching.